What makes a news source trustworthy? For 137 years, the Financial Times has answered that question with fearless reporting, expertise in global affairs, and editorial independence. FT journalists deliver the analysis and insights that shape boardroom decisions and policy debates alike. So when the world feels complex, turn to a source that's built its name on courage and trust. Read more and subscribe at ft.com.
Hello and welcome to Monocle on Culture. I'm Robert Bound. On today's episode, we meet the artist and filmmaker Isaac Julien. The British artist, born in London in 1960, is well known and much admired for his multi-screen filmic installations that mix many other artistic disciplines: photography, dance, music, painting and theatre, to weave rich tapestries of multi-layered beauty and suggestion. Some works, like Julien's seminal Looking for Langston from 1979, is a beautiful monochrome docudrama about the private world of Langston Hughes, Don of the Harlem Renaissance, the 1920s celebration of African American culture. While his Young Soul Rebels from 1991 was a more conventional feature that won prizes at that year's Cannes Film Festival, Julien has since then embarked on a more art world than film world career, although mostly through the big screen, or sometimes scores of them. His latest work, titled Once Again, Statues Never Die, is a recreation of the relationship between Dr. Albert C. Barnes, an early American collector of African-American art and artefacts, and the black philosopher Alain Locke. It's lyrical, beautiful, suggestive and didactic. It's art, about ownership and the eye of the beholder. While his work enjoys a big survey show at the De Young Museum in San Francisco, Julien also came in to talk about studying at St. Martin's in the 1980s, being a young Royal Academician, and the difference between films and art films. Here is Isaac Julien. Isaac, welcome to the programme. Wonderful, finally, to get you onto the show. And I should point out that Isaac's wonderful outfit, as ever, beautifully dressed, is wasted on the listening several. We should be the viewing several. Nonetheless, so we're here really to talk about some of the wonderful works collected in a new show, or a current show, at the De Young Museum in San Francisco. But maybe we can use that as the springboard to diving into the balmy pool of your whole career, Isaac. So the show is called I Dream a World, which is a Langston Hughes quote, right? That's right. And it must be wonderful to see all these things collected under one roof. It must be an inspiring and sobering thing. How do you feel doing the installation for that show? How did it feel putting it together?
Well, of course, I Dream a World at the De Young Museum is very much inspired by the Tate show, What Freedom Means to Me, which opened a couple of years ago. Yeah. And in a sense, Claudia Schmuckley, the curator, I think took her inspiration from that exhibition, but expanded it. And so in that show, we have a 9-screen of 10,000 Waves made in 2010, the 10-screen of Lessons of the Hour, 5-screen of Once Again, Statues Never Die. And we did a conservation project on several works between, well, actually 1999 to 2005, over 6 works, which I made over that period. Quite a productive period, the early 2000s. We went back to original negatives and did a conservation to 4K. And so it was very exciting for me to see some very early works in that exhibition. It opens with Baltimore from 2003. Mm-hmm. Starring Melvin Van Peebles. It's a kind of blaxploitation meets science fiction, over the art meets blaxploitation films, whatever you want to call it. And so that's quite a fun work to start off with. Newly conserved. Yeah.
So, as people will know, you're a one-man art cinema multiplex, and it's come to being in San Francisco, right? So this is an amazing thing. So this sort of maximal, your films are very immersive things. They're very beguiling and bewitching, beautiful works. When they're played and displayed and cut through multiple screens, I mean, that invites lots of different, I suppose that invites dialogue within the film itself. You've got bits of the film talking to bits of the film that sometimes for the first time. How do you decide how to put those things together, I wonder?
Well, in a way, perhaps maybe for the sort of novel viewer, if they come in, it could be a bit bewildering. It could also be very exciting. But certainly it's going to challenge the way that they look at films per se, because, of course, they are film installations, so they're multiple screen installations. So in a way, where does the eye look? I think it begins to wander around and it begins to make its own interpretation, he says. Our intention of making the works is really to create this way of having an immersive experience for the cinema. So it's like a meta-cinema experience.
Yeah.
Maybe the multiplex is a kind of good comparison, but the multiplex you can usually choose one screen or the other. In this, you have to choose several screens at once. So I think it just makes for a sort of exciting frisson for the spectator, and they know they're engaging in a work which is a little bit different from the kind of more normative experience you might have going to the cinema. And I think they get it pretty quickly that they have to, in a way, stay with the work to understand it. But to do that, I think you have to make the work not attractive, but it has to somehow lull the spectator. And that's what I enjoy doing in making the multiple screen works. But they're not made by myself alone. I have lots of different collaborators on my works. And I would say a key component to the collaborative spirit is Adam Finch, who is the person who edits my works, who's an astonishing film editor.
Yeah.
And he has a task of, as it were, making sense, if you like, for the viewer, along with myself, what you're looking at and how you're going to look.
Yeah. But your works contain, there are, if I may say, didactic elements to them sometimes very mystical elements. You leave the audience, sometimes they're being told things, sometimes they're definitely being left to guess things, I guess. And lots of that is obviously in your original artistic intent with something. And some of it's to do in the editing, and some of it presumably is to do in the eye of the beholder, is it? I wonder how, and when there are things that are spliced up so much, how does that work for you? I wonder if you're seeing fresh things in those works now.
Well, I mean, I see these works as rhythmic works, that they're basically edited with a certain choreography, and so I think they usually do tell a story. They are narrative to a certain extent, which I think in some ways is pretty obvious. People can usually follow the story, and audiences are usually quite excited to follow the story, I think. So, and I think in a way, spectators these days are used to multiple screens. They always interpolated when they're on their phone, looking at many screens simultaneously, whether they're on Instagram or Facebook or doing emails or Zooms. I mean, we interface, I think, with multiple screens. I mean, all I've done is to poeticize that and to bring it into a sort of museum context. But I think the rhythmic aspect, the sonic aspect, the sound, which is not often discussed, I think is also a very important component, because, film is 50% sound, 50% image. And in a way, how those things are calibrated is, I think, the essence to the success, if something can work or not.
And music is obviously part and parcel of lots of your films as well. I was actually rewatching once again Statues Never Die this morning, which is such a beautiful thing. I mean, there are, again, the way that you cast images and the way that you use music in that as well is absolutely stunning. Has that always been? I mean, right back from Soul Rebels, one of your first films. Was it your first film? Young Soul Rebels.
Feature film, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Classic film, or I don't know, whatever we want to call it. Music's obviously very important to you as well. At what point do you start choosing the soundtrack, choosing music to go with the film? Or does that take you on a journey and sort of infuse the images and get you to choose images, I wonder?
Well, I think in a work like, once again, Statues Never Die, what I tried to do was to work with Alice, who is the kind of singer, and to get her to, in a way, write a film, you could say music script for the work through her song. And that song very much tells the story of what the film's about. I think, that Alice Smith is a key component because, of course, the song existed before making the film, and she basically was able to encapsulate the feelings that I wanted the audience to experience in watching the work. So quite often, as in the case of work like Young Soul Rebels, all the soundtracks existed several decades before I made the film, because that film was based on the 70s. It was made in the late 90s, or early 90s, excuse me. Age.
No more funkstiness,
confuses time. And also with, works like, say, Looking for Langston, it was made in 1989. The soundtrack existed for that whole film 2 years before I shot anything. Right. So in a way, the sound becomes a sort of leading thematic for the work. And in that sense, I think there is a sort of very musical approach to the works. And so I think that musical approach is something which is very exciting if you're making multiple screen works, because I think you get that question of surround sound and how that experience can captivate an audience, which of course, if you think about how cinema is today, if you go to see a film like Sinners, for example, you realise that, also that director is very much working with the sound. That's a leading voice in the work, and it's imbricated in the work in the many songs which are part of it, and in a way gives it a certain, I think, sort of attention.
Yeah, and draws you in. And I guess it's a beat for the actors to hit, and it's a beat for us to... It gives a rhythm to the film, which you can do in shots and edit and all the rest of it. But yeah, it's all of a rhythm, isn't it? I guess it becomes all of a piece. Talking of kind of the hookup between music and film, I interviewed a production designer for like Hollywood movies recently, and I said, no offense, but if you're doing your job well as a production designer, you're moving the story along, and you're making all the scenes, all the scenery, and all the rest of it. But basically, it's successful if no one's really noticing your work, which is a sad, but slightly true thing. And he said, "Oh yeah, I'm like the bassist, So there is this hookup between music and film. I feel for you, it's very much in your DNA, right? It's you're far above being the bassist, Isaac. But what are you, lead violin?
I'm just a conductor. That's all I am. Okay. I'm conducting all the elements, and you need a conductor, and so the director is a conductor, and in a way, you're giving the form its kind of direction, essentially. Yeah.
And tell us, I'm very intrigued in your use. You put a lot of artwork in your films. You put a lot of, in museum context and all the rest of it. That your new the Lina Bobardi film is fascinating in that respect. And also back to Statues Never Die, of course. There's so much framing of other works and how we look at works within them as well.
This so-called primitive Negro art, in the judgment of those who know it best, is really a classic expression of its kind. The movement has a history, dumb, dusty trophies of imperialism. But we must believe that there still slumbers in the blood something which, when stirred, will move with a peculiar emotional intensity toward it. Nothing is more galvanizing than the sense of a cultural past.
I'm making a new way.
That's an ongoing interpretation for you of other work and the importance of work from where it comes from in the world and all the rest of it. What were some of the first things? What was like the first museum you remember going to as a kid? I wonder. Well, that it really seems to be striking a chord. There's something that goes through so much of your work, which is looking and loving at other artwork.
Well, ironically enough, the first museum that I had an exhibition in or showed working was in the Royal Academy Summer Show.
Well, you are now an academician, aren't you?
Well, yes, I'm now, which is all very ironic to become an academician. But of course, when I had my painting in 1980, Summer Show, and it sold, I decided to buy my Super 8 camera with it. But I think, in a way, if there was an ambivalence that I had towards, let's say, the art world at that particular time, I think it was primarily about the way in which I wanted to communicate with certain audiences. But I think I never lost the attraction or love of art in my work in relationship to subjects, Martin School of Art product, such as I am, of an art school milieu, in a way that always stays with you. And I am really interested, seriously interested in contemporary art, and just not contemporary art, but art per se. And in a way, it's one of the reasons which drew me back into the art world, because I could make works which would follow some of those themes within it with a already made audience, so to speak. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I deviated from the commercial film trajectory into a more art trajectory, so I could focus on that, because I find it very inspiring, and I want to inspire others, essentially.
That's a wonderful thing to know, that you sold your work at the summer exhibition at the Royal Academy in 1980, and with the proceeds you bought a Super 8 camera which started your career, or allowed you to start your career in earnest. Have you still got that camera?
Somewhere
on the shoebox somewhere.
Yes, in the archive. In the archive.
Yeah. Because it must be quite a cherished thing. Can you remember what it felt like in your hand at the time? That must have been very satisfying.
Well, I must say, I think it's really good, but I don't think I'm a cameraman.
Okay.
So, I've been very lucky to work with other collaborators who could shoot films much more, I think, interestingly than I could. But a lot of my early works, like Who Could Colin Roach, 1984, Territories, 1983, they're all films which are shot on Super 8 film, 16mm film, and so it's great to have those works in collections today. Yeah, so I think there's a way that, however, the kind of interest I've always had in painting, for example, all of those things never really disappear.
They haven't leached away.
As much as you might want to disavow it, it comes back into your work in terms of how you look, how you frame things, how you want sort of audiences or spectators to relate to your work. Yep. So.
And you said you've sort of made the distinction that obviously people will know that you move out of sort of the feature film world into the art film world. I've always wanted to ask someone like you, and especially you, Isaac, this very basic question, but what do you see as the key differences? You obviously mind works in a different way, but what are the key differences between the films that you were thinking to make and the films that you ended up making, I wonder?
Well, I think it's to do with the intentionality, because I think in the feature film world, the intentionality is the story which is told in a particular manner, and it has particular ingredients in how you tell that story. So there's a kind of protocol that you have to follow, and within that protocol, of course, you can bend the rules, and people do bend the rules, so it's not as if, you can't make the kind of film that one might like. But I think it's to do with the intentionality. When I was just shooting recently a new commission for Palazzo Te for a work which will open and celebrate 500 years of Palazzo Te in Mantua in October, we're filming with quite a large crew, but what we're filming is perhaps not the kind of thing you might film ordinarily. So I think that's the thing. Essentially, I'm making images when I make films. And in this work, it does actually have dialogue. We have Gwendoline Christie, who is one of the stars, and Sheila Atim, who's the other star. And their conversation, it's a quite serious conversation. It's a philosophical conversation about where we are now. But at the same time, I don't want to be strapped into the kind of logic of how you make works, and so I want to have a certain artistic autonomy and freedom. So I think it's really that thing which is the important aspect, which I don't care much for in a more commercial setting.
By the way, I wish to point out that you had quite a mischievous look on your face, Isaac, when you were talking about the shooting of and content of this film that's going to be previewed at the Palazzo Te in Mantua. Can you tease us with any of the content, or will we wait until October and speak to you again then?
No, I mean, it's a film which essentially has time travelers. Gwendolyn and Sheila are time travelers, cyborgian subjects, and they travel across 500 years and have this conversation and traverse different locations and spaces. So, and we kind of travel with them, basically.
I'm looking forward to the trip to Mantua already. Sounds great. Or wherever we end up in this film. It sounds amazing. How much is there any, I get the sense that your work is scripted and storyboarded, but I wonder what sort of free rein do your performers have in your work?
Well,
absolutely none.
No, I mean, I think, in the case of, Gwendolyn and Sheila, I mean, they're sort of collaborators in the work, very much so. And the relationship to this work, no, I mean, it's not storyboarded as such, but we work very closely together. So we have a wonderful cinematographer, Jess Hoare, who's just shot new Marvel film, and he's the DOP. So that's very exciting to work with him for the first time.
Yeah.
And so, there's quite a lot of, industry, Hollywood type sort of technicians and people around, but they're doing the things that I want them to do as opposed to what would ordinarily be, in a way, asked of them in a more sort of industrial kind of context.
Yeah. It's amazing to go from working on a Marvel film, to working with you, Isaac. That's running the gamut, isn't it? You might call it. It's amazing. It's amazing stuff. What can be kind of it's obviously each to their own, and working in that world, it's wonderful it must be wonderful for people like that to work with you and to be part of this to be in an artistic environment rather than, as you say, a more industrial, commercial, stopwatch kind of centric world, I suppose. I mean, maybe that's a question for them to answer.
Oh, the stopwatch is always there.
Oh, is that you?
We never have enough time to make what images I want.
You just sitting there harumphing, tapping your watch. Is that how it works? So you mentioned St. Martin's. What was the vibe? Were you there early 80s? Yeah. What was that? That must have been. We think of it as quite a golden age, quite an era. What was the vibe? What was it like on the ground?
Well, St. Martin's is a core art college to go to, one of the best art colleges to go to in England, and so I was very lucky to be able to be a student there, especially in the early 80s. It's not too far after punk rock, and you had that sort of punk rock do-it-yourself attitude vibe there. And I think one of the things which was really exciting was the way in which all the different students, whether they're in fashion or design or fine art painting, or in my case, fine art film, there was a kind of dialogue, and there was an interdisciplinary spirit where there was collaborative relations that were always growing and, in a way, in conversation with one another. So I'd like to think that I took that spirit in my work into what I do now, which I think, in a way, as things have become more professionalized, you can see that everything's more seconded, and you don't get the same sort of spirit because people are very much involved in their own areas. So, and I think, it's also to do with the different people that you meet. I mean, sort of painters like Peter Doig or John Galliano, or fashion editors like Hamish Bowles. All of these different, if you like, protagonists, they're all sort of students and friends that you realise that they will make a contribution of some kind or an intervention. And so, for example, Adam Finch, who I work with to this very day, was a fellow student at the St. Martin's School of Art, and he works as an editor and edits quite a lot of different movies. And all of those things are kind of very important things which you can, in a way, you don't know how they're going to develop in the future, but you have an idea that there's a sort of zeitgeist feeling.
Yeah. So you were young soul rebels together then. There's some pretty
Precisely.
good DNA kicking around at St Martin's with the names you mentioned as well. Peter Doig. I know you're a fan of his work, aren't you?
Great fan of his work.
Yeah. And Hamish as well, of course. I mean, there's lots of different horses for courses here, I think.
Precisely.
Creatively. Yeah. And what about films growing up? What were you watching then? What was on at the cinema that you were into? What was the sort of cinema scene?
Oh, I was just like, the normal cineast student, Nouvelle Vague,
Black roll neck, horn-rimmed glasses.
Precisely, Godard, of course, and in a way, basically very much interested also in what would become independent Black American cinema. So Charles Burnett, Julie Dash, who were filmmakers that I was, in a way, looking at their work, and I felt when I began in my early days with the Sankofa Film Video Collective, we were making films which were emulating those works to a certain extent, or in dialogue with them. And in a way, Looking for Langston grew out of that work. And to a certain extent, you could say, for example, when Young's Rebels was made and we went to Cannes, it was the same time when Spike Lee had his film, I think it was called Jungle Fever. And so it's kind of a very exciting time at that particular moment. And Cannes was named Noir La Croisette, and they had this whole sort of response that was happening to what would then become the sort of more hip-hop cinema as a kind of brand. I didn't quite fit into that, but I think, it was a really interesting moment.
Yeah.
And I think all of those interests, for me, grew into trying to then make a film intervention that I really wanted to make, which wasn't perhaps all in that sort of area.
But it's so romantic. That's such a wonderful film. I mean, Looking for Langston, it's just got such a poetry to it. It's such a bewitching thing. And just finally, I wrote this quote down, and I think this came from Statues Never Die. In the dream world of art, I'm all I want to be. Sounds like that's fitting testament to where we are so far with your career, Isaac. Is that fair to say?
Well, I have to say, I maybe have to pinch myself to kind of be able to be conversing with you now and to say that, yes, I've been able to stick to my guns, and to create my own road. And so, and it hasn't really been that easy, but it's been very satisfying in terms of results and the ways in which now a lot of these works, like the works which are in I Dream World, are kind of being embraced and looked at and reviewed by a young generation. And so that's really very exciting.
Well, congratulations on all of it, and power to your continued elbow. Good luck with the Palazzo Te in Mantua. We'll see you there. And for the time being, Isaac Julien, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Robert.
And thank you to Isaac Julien, and his show, I Dream a World, is still at the De Young in San Francisco until the 13th of July, and Isaac's work is in many big collections around the world, so take your pick. Monocle on Culture is produced by Sophie Monaghan-Coombs and Steph Chungu, and Steph also edits the show. Many thanks to Hunter Wang for their editing help this week too. We'll be back at the same time next week, but until then, from me, Robert Bound, thank you for tuning in.
What does culture say about the way we live and how we could live better? Join Monocle in Barcelona this September for our annual Quality of Life conference. From bold new voices in media, design and the arts to lively debates on diplomacy, design and urbanism, it's 3 days of fresh thinking and creative exchange. Find out more and book your seat at monocle.com/conference.